Hello, my dear friends. Today I will tell you a mysterious story about the Abaddon. Part 1. The Vale of Avernus. The lands of Avernus lay at the edge of all that was known, a stretch of moorland and low brambled hills where the sky was an endless slate and the sun a pale, indifferent coin behind a shroud of perpetual cloud. There was no warmth here, only a restless wind that scoured the heather and twisted the black boughs of ancient yews, and beneath the earth an unease older than memory. It was said that in the heart of these lands, where even the crows would not fly and the grass grew in sullen, sickly tufts, there yawned a wound in the world, the source. Some called it a font, others a fissure, but all agreed it was power, forbidding, inexhaustible, and as old as time's first hour. From its depths coiled a vapor, darker than a shadow, heavy with secrets. This was the Black Mist. None knew its true origins, not even the oldest among the house of Avernus. Their chronicles spoke only in riddles and myth, that the mist was a gift, or perhaps a curse, bestowed by gods long since fled from mortal sight. But generations had learned to bend knee to its will, to live in its shadow, if not always by choice. The house of Avernus, the house itself, perched upon a rise overlooking the source, its silhouette jagged and proud against a forever twilight horizon. Its walls were hewn from black stone, veined with opalescent minerals that shimmered with a sullen inward light when night deepened. Cold banners hung limp from tall towers, each bearing the sigil of the broken circle, emblem of the Avernus line. Within those walls, darkness was not merely a fact of life, but a creed. The lords of this place were seldom seen by common folk. Their faces, pale and gaunt as if carved from moonstone, were rarely glimpsed beyond the torch-lit corridors of their ancestral keep. Eyes marked by a particular glimmer, not merely reflection, but an inner illumination that bespoke kinship with something vast and ancient. On the day of a birth, the bells tolled thrice, a sound that echoed through stone and moor alike, summoning every scion of Avernus to gather in solemn anticipation. It was not joy that filled those halls on such occasions, but gravity, a sense that what transpired here had consequence far beyond blood or kin. The rite of mist. It was tradition, as rigid as iron. Each newborn must be presented before the source and bathed in its exhalation. No child of Avernus was truly accepted until they had tasted the mist. The ritual was ancient, its origins lost to fire and war, but its power was undiminished. On this day, midwives carried the swaddled infant through echoing corridors lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes flickered with a knowing light. At their head strode Lord Varus Avernus, patriarch of the house, his robe trailing intricate patterns stitched in thread, black as onyx. They descended into the crypts below the keep, where walls wept with moisture and torches sputtered against unseen drafts. The air thickened with every step, until breathing felt like drawing in water, shot through with ink. The chamber at the end of all paths was a vast cavern domed in living stone. In its center yawned the source itself, an open gash in the earth, rimmed with crystalline growths that pulsed in time with some subterranean heartbeat. From its depths rose tendrils of vapor, dense and strange, shifting with an intelligence all their own. Lord Varus lifted his arms, his voice sonorous and echoing. Let the child be named and known by mist and blood alike. He nodded to the midwives, who stepped forward and gently lowered the infant's tiny form until it hovered mere inches above the surface of the vaporous pool. Darkness licked its soft flesh. Tendrils of cold, caress, and threat intermingled, and for a moment all present held their breath. The mist responded. A shimmer ran through its depths, subtle as a heartbeat, in greeting or warning none could say. The baby's cries faltered into silence, tiny fists unclenched as if in dream. The vapor began to swirl faster around him, whirls forming runes that danced upon his skin before fading into nothing. A voice, a whisper, only Lord Varkas could hear, spoke in thought rather than tone. Another child, another vessel. He stiffened involuntarily. Every time he stood here, he wondered if this would be the one claimed wholly by the source. "Let him be bound," intoned Father Garanth, master of rites. "Let him be set apart." They raised the child from the mist, careful not to let it cling too long or too deep, for stories haunted these halls of infants lost utterly. Spirits dissolved into fog before their first word. The third, the land and its secrets. It was understood by all, even those who wished it otherwise, that this land's prosperity depended on its bond with the mist. Crops might fail elsewhere in times of blight, but here thin barley still grew stubbornly gold. Disease found little purchase, wounds healed quickly, enemies hesitated at their borders, not for fear of arms alone, but for what dwelled beneath root and rock. But every offering had its price. Some nights, when fog pressed thick against window panes and even dogs fell silent, strange lights moved across the moors. Will-o'-the-wisps winked above shallow pools. Voices called in tongues older than men. Children dreamt uneasy dreams. No one spoke openly of what happened to those who betrayed their house or shunned its rituals. The black mist was both guardian and jailer. It gave freely, but never forgot a debt. Fourth, old blood. Within these stone halls walked many who bore the mark of Avernus, the patent pallor, the restless gaze, but only a few understood their true duty. The eldest among them wore robes crusted with silver thread. They spoke seldom, and only in council. Lady Seraphine, whose hair had faded to snowy white, but whose steel blue eyes missed nothing, ruled alongside Lord Varkas. Their children clustered about them, proud Edrin, fierce Kalia, brooding Loris, quiet Moilis, all trained from youth to lead armies and oversee ritual both. Yet for all their power it was clear, the true master here was not flesh or bone, but mist itself. Dialogues amidst shadows. On this night, the night before another ritual, the family gathered in the Hall of Ancients. Walls hung with tattered banners and lit by guttering sconces. Lady Seraphine's voice cut through gloom. "Varkas, what troubles you?" The Lord hesitated, a rare thing for one so stern. "It is this child," he admitted softly. "There is something different." Edron cocked his head skeptically. "Every child is different until they prove themselves. But none have drawn so much reaction from the source," murmured Malus, her gaze fixed on her father's face. "Even when I was presented, there were no such omens." Kalia scoffed. "Omens are for peasants and priests." Lady Seraphine ignored her daughter's bravado, pressing onward. "We do as tradition demands. That is our strength." Yet in her eyes flickered doubt, a shadow cast not by torches, but by memory. The source, unveiled. The source itself defied mortal understanding, even for those who considered it their birthright. Many had tried over centuries to plumb its depths, to bottle its mist or bind its power to their own ends, but always they failed or vanished or returned, changed in ways none dared name aloud. Some said there were faces within that vapor. Others swore they heard voices echoing up from below when moonlight struck just so. On festival eves, brave children dared each other to creep as close as courage allowed. None ever lingered long. It was not merely fear that guarded this place. It was reverence. The black mist was eternal watcher over Avernus, sometimes benefactor, sometimes executioner, and always judge. Sixth, voices within. Not all who dwelled in Avernus were content with their fate. Servants whispered behind closed doors. Soldiers traded rumors beneath ramparts slick with rain. One such conversation took place as two young guards made their rounds along the inner wall. "You felt it too?" asked Kellen, shivering despite his mail. His companion nodded gravely. "When they brought out the boy, I swear I saw shapes moving in that fog." "Old wives' tales," muttered Kellen, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe so," said the other softly, "but my mother told me once, never trust what comes from down below, nor what it touches." They lapsed into silence as thunder rolled across moorland, a reminder that here nature itself bent knee to something deeper than rain or wind. Seventh, the marking. When dawn bled gray across Avernus's towers and mists rolled low over barren fields, preparations for the day's rite began anew. All members of house and vassal alike assembled beneath banners stained with age and memory. Atop a dais, wreathed in strange lilies that bloomed only where mist was thickest, stood Lord Varkas again, this time flanked by his wife and eldest heirs. He held his infant son aloft before all assembled. "Behold, the latest born to Avernus. May he serve our land and our source as have all before him." A hush fell as priestesses anointed child's brow with dew gathered from stones nearest to source itself, a substance known to burn faintly blue in torchlight if one looked closely enough. Edron leaned towards his mother. "Will he survive it?" Lady Seraphine's lips were tight as drumheads. "If he is strong enough, yes." And deep within his infant mind, even as mist curled around tiny fingers, the child saw something no one else could see. A vision of endless darkness, not as terror, but promise. A voice not as curse, but invitation. 8. The gathering storm. As fate would have it, on this very morning, a storm gathered far to the north, clouds piling upon clouds like spilled ink across parchment sky. Lightning flickered above distant hills. Thunder growled low like an animal roused from winter sleep. House retainers muttered nervously. Storm on ritual day, ill omen. But Lord Varkas dismissed such fears with a wave. "We are Avernus. Our covenant is older than weather or chance." Yet even he could not shake unease. Not when he gazed upon his son and saw pale eyes burning with a light that was not wholly mortal. In that moment, he wondered, what have we brought forth? What price will be asked? The 9th. The first echoes. That night, long after ceremony ended, the keep resounded with restless dreams. Some servants claimed they heard footsteps where none should walk. Others found cold handprints upon window glass at dawn. And above all else, there lingered a new note within black mist itself, a song or sigh just beyond hearing, as if something ancient stirred once more within Avernus's bones. Thus did begin another chapter in the shadowed annals of House Avernus, a story shaped by darkness old as time itself, by mist that gave both blessing and bane, by one child marked from birth for greatness or doom. And so, through veils upon veils, does legend stride forth into night. End of Part 1. Part 2. The Blade and the Veil. Wind swept the moors of Avernus with ceaseless hunger, carrying with it the tang of iron and peat, the whisper of secrets half remembered. In the deepening, lightless hours, the keep stood like a wound stitched to the land, a place apart, girded not only by stone, but by traditions older and colder than the hills themselves. Aye, the lessons of iron and shadow. Within those walls, life for the scions of Avernus was regimented as the march of stars. From their earliest steps, heirs were led by silent hand through corridors lined with ancestral portraits, faces pale, eyes luminous, toward the training yard where banners hung limp in perpetually sullen air. Here, swords were not merely tools of war, but vessels for the will of house and mist alike. At dawn, the yard echoed with the clash of steel and barked commands. Lord Varkas, imposing in sable mail edged with blue sigils, surveyed his children's efforts with a gaze as sharp as frost. Again, he intoned, voice carrying across gravel and dew, the blade is an extension of your oath. The shield, a covenant between your flesh and our source. Edrin, eldest by 7 winters, moved with practiced precision, his blade flashing in a pattern drilled since childhood. His sister, Morel, swift as a thunderclap shadow, parried with a dancer's grace, though her jaw was set in a line that brooked no error. The younger siblings struggled by comparison. Some faltered under weight of armor not yet their own. Others blinked mist from their eyes, as if sensing that some part of them longed for what lay beneath the earth rather than for glory above it. Remember, Lord Varkas called, the mist does not serve the unworthy, but it shelters those who honor its bargain. At his side stood Lady Seraphine, her presence cool, almost spectral. Few remembered a time when she had laughed. Fewer still had witnessed her raise a blade, though rumor claimed she'd once bested all her kin during the choosing. It was she who taught the rites of silence and patience, who instructed her children in the art of seeing what was not said. Together, they trained not merely warriors, but wardens, keepers whose duty was to guard not fields or borders, but the very secret that gave birth to their house. Second, the hidden curriculum. As dusk fell each evening, the heirs gathered in the Hall of Veils, a chamber draped with curtains so black they seemed to drink torchlight from the air. Here sat the 3 principal elders, Euron the chronicler, whose hair was braided with rings of jet, old Morethin, whose sightless eyes missed nothing, and Holvar, whose laughter was rare but thunderous. It was custom for each scion to kneel before the elder's dais and repeat the creed. We are Avernus, the circle broken but unbending, children of Vale and Night, bound to keep what must be kept and to wield what must not be let free. Afterward came the true lessons, not of swordplay or tactics alone, but of things whispered only when shadows grew long. Euron would unroll scrolls inked in languages lost to all but Avernus, tales of times when the source boiled over and roads ran black with sorrow. Morethin would recite names from memory, Ancestors who tried to command the mist outright, who vanished or returned, changed, bearing marks none could erase. Her voice, gentle but implacable, warned, "The mist chooses as it wills. Guard your heart. Do not presume." Holvar, meanwhile, regaled them with riddles. What devours all light yet gives life? What sings at edges but can never cross? None answered aloud, for in Avernus some truths were meant only for the soul to ponder in solitude. On certain nights, when the north wind howled and shadows writhed on stone, the elders showed relics locked within chests banded in cold iron, fragments of ancient blades still humming with blue fire, vials of dew gathered at new moon from stones near the source, a tattered cloak said to have belonged to one who walked into mist and returned grinning. The trials of blood and will. Preparation for war in Avernus was not measured solely by strength or skill. Each heir faced the marking, a trial meant to test resolve and fealty, not to kin alone, but to the source itself. On the eve before his marking, Edrund sat beside his sister at hearth's edge. Flames leapt blue-gold. Above them hung a painting of their great-grandfather, pale-eyed and grim. "Do you fear it?" Morel asked softly. Edrund shook his head. "Not fear. I wonder why this must fall to us again and again. We train for war. But against whom? No neighbor dares trespass here." She frowned. "We fight for what lies beneath. The mist protects and curses both. Without it, we are nothing but another dead house." He glanced at her sidelong. "Is that what you believe?" A pause. Then, "I trust Mother more than Father. She knows what it costs." The marking required each candidate to cross by torchlight from keep to standing stones that ringed the source. A journey made alone. They bore neither weapon nor shield, only a silver circlet inscribed with runes too ancient to translate. Mist clung thick as wool about their ankles. Breath smoked on chill air. At the circle's heart waited Merethen and Holvar, one to witness, one to judge. "Speak your vow," intoned Merethen. Edrun knelt among stones, slick with dew. "I am of Avernus. The circle broken yet bound, I give my will to mist and house alike." The elders pressed a drop of dew onto his brow. For a heartbeat he saw nothingness deeper than sleep. Then a flicker, pale blue fire dancing at his fingertips. Holvar nodded once. "The source has marked you." Each sibling underwent similar trial. All bore faint echoes of power thereafter, a spark in their eyes, warmth in palm or pulse where cold had reigned before. Yet sometimes a marking failed. One cousin, young Talon, returned at dawn glassy-eyed and silent as stone. He spoke little again. His hand twitched now and then toward darkness where none could see the unspoken motive. If asked why they trained so fiercely, most Avernus would say, "To defend our house." Yet behind closed doors, within council chambers paneled in black yew, the elders whispered truer reasons. Not all who coveted power dared storm Avernus's walls outright. There were other threats, those drawn by rumor of what lay beneath, the source, font of darkness, and those who despised its taint upon land and sky alike. Once every generation, envoys arrived from distant keeps, red-robed priests from the Abbey of Silence, veiled sisters from Windrake Monastery, even warlords bearing gifts wrapped in honeyed words. They always asked after the same thing. Let us witness your sacred spring. Share with us your blessing for health or long life, or more bluntly, surrender what you guard, else we will take it. Lord Varkas met such requests with stone-faced refusal. The mist is not ours to give, he'd reply. But always he watched their faces for signs of disbelief, or worse, hunger. Lady Seraphine saw further still, they do not fear us enough, not yet. Thus were heirs trained in arts both open and occult. How to read intent behind flattery. How to turn threat into bargain without ever revealing truth. How to wear tradition as armor while shielding what truly mattered. The wound in world skin that pulsed beneath their feet. V. The emergence of power. In time, subtle changes came upon some heirs after their marking. Adrian's voice now carried a resonance that settled quarrels before they began. Morel found her wounds knitting faster than seemed natural after sparring bouts. Even youngest Corvin sometimes glimpsed motes of blue fire swirling above torches at dusk. It is the mist, Holvar confided one night as Edron nursed a bruised arm. It answers only those who seek, not for self alone, but for house. Still, not all welcomed such gifts. Rumors spread through servant halls of shadows moving where none walked, of voices heard at threshold between sleep and waking. One chambermaid insisted she'd glimpsed a pale shape watching her from atop eastern parapet, a shape that vanished as soon as she named it aloud. And always there lingered sense that something watched from depths below, a patience neither wholly benign nor wholly malign, only hungry for purpose yet unmet. Sixth, the winter conclave. With winter's approach came greater urgency. Word reached Averest that a bandit lord now called himself King Beyond the Mists, rallying dispossessed clans along northern marches. The elders convened beneath banners heavy with frost. We must send an answer, Lord Varkas declared. Edron volunteered first, backed by Morel and two cousins recently marked. Before riding out, they knelt before Lady Seraphine. "Remember," she murmured, wrapping blue-dyed cloaks around their shoulders, "you carry more than steel into battle." The skirmish was brief and brutal, a column of armored riders driven back by force less physical than willful. Edron's blade shone with ghostlight when he struck down foes who tried to breach mist-shrouded barrows. Morel's laughter echoed cold as sleet as she rallied defenders through fog no outsider could pierce. When they returned victorious, even dour Holvar allowed himself a rare smile. "You have learned well," he said gruffly. But Lady Seraphine only studied Abaddon, her youngest, still too small for sword or saddle, where he watched silent from battlements above. His eyes reflected none of his siblings' triumph, only the restless churn of mist below. 7. The pact renewed. Days turned colder, nights pressed closer about Keep's gables. At Moon's turning house, Averest gathered in crypt beneath main hall, where stone coffins bore names chiseled half away by time. There, the elders led ritual that bound every living soul anew to land and source alike. Blood pricked from thumb onto black-veined stone. Oaths whispered in dialect older than empire. A circle formed, broken only at northern arc. Each heir added a drop to basin, filled with dew from standing stones. As they did so, blue flame danced upon water's skin, and each felt something stir within, a wordless promise, a hunger, a warning. When silence fell at last, Lord Varkas spoke. We endure because we remember our duty, not merely as kin or warriors, but as wardens. Morel pressed her hand against Abaddon's shoulder. You will join us soon, she whispered. But he only stared at Basin, at flickers within flame, and wondered, what does it mean to be chosen? What might I become if I follow where this path leads? 8th, whispered secrets. In darkling weeks that followed, Abaddon grew drawn to places others shunned. The windowless vault where relics smoldered behind ironwork, narrow stair that spiraled down toward crypt's root. He listened outside council doors as elders debated future wars. He lingered by windowsill at midnight, peering into curls of black vapor rising from moor. Sometimes he caught snatches, half-thoughts not quite his own. The mist serves none. There is no end, only change. His siblings worried over him. He dreams too much, Morel fretted. Edrin shrugged. Perhaps he sees what we do not. Lord Varkas dismissed such talk as children's fancy, but Seraphine watched more closely now. One night, she found him tracing sigils into dust along corridor floor. What do you seek? She asked gently. He looked up, eyes pale as glacial pools. I do not know, he answered honestly, but I feel called. She knelt beside him, voice low as wind over graves. Be wary where you walk, and never trust what answers from below. 9th. The shadows gather. Winter deepened, snow-crusted banners on keep's western walls. Rumor swelled anew. Shapes glimpsed near standing stones. Cattle found lifeless on moor without mark or wound. Some whispered it was bandits returned, or worse, spirits grown bold since last marking. But among elders, concern grew sharper. Was it sign that pact frayed? Or did mist itself hunger for more than ritual could satisfy? One morning, Euron summoned heirs into Hall of Veils. In every age, he intoned, fingers moving among beads carved from starstone, the veil grows thin. He looked pointedly at Abaddon, then at each sibling in turn. Our bond must be tested not only by blade or oath, but by wisdom, learned in darkness. He led them down into crypt once more, this time beyond coffins and into chamber few had seen. Walls carved with runes that shimmered faintly blue, floor inscribed in spirals, echoing shape of mist as it curled up from source itself. At room's center rested low altar-bearing object swathed in black cloth, a sword hilt traced with veins of opal-blue metal. The first blade, Euron said reverently, forged when Pact was young. He motioned for Edrin to lift cloth. But when Abaddon reached out instead, blue light leapt from hilt to child's palm. Cold, yet electric, whispering secrets none else could hear. So did years turn beneath watchful gaze of mist and memory. In House Averest swords were forged, oaths spoken, and heirs marked not solely by blood, but by power that flowed unseen from wound at world's heart. Yet for one child there grew questions deeper than ritual could answer. What did it mean, not merely to serve Vale, but to become part of it? Thus did legend gather like storm clouds above keep's black towers, waiting for spark that would sunder silence and call forth destinies written in dew, in darkness, in the ceaseless, sighing song of Avernus's undying mist. Part 3. The Baptism of Shadows. The night of Abaddon's baptism came on the edge of a storm. Winds scoured the bleak terraces of House Averest, snapping the black banners and moaning through the arrow slits. Inside, the servants moved like wraiths, their faces pale with anticipation and something colder, fear perhaps, or awe. For even among a people raised in perpetual dusk, this was a night out of legend. The Hall of Veils had never seemed so vast. Its pillars loomed like petrified trees, their shadowy forms braided with banners that bore the broken circle. Flickering blue lights hovered above the nave, wisps drawn from the mist itself, and cast strange patterns across the faces of those assembled. Nobles and kin filled every stone pew, their eyes trained on the altar, where the newborn inheritor would meet destiny. Seraphine, eldest sister and high acolyte for this hour, stood robed in midnight blue. She held Abaddon in her arms. Swaddled against the chill, he did not cry, his gaze fixed on the ceiling's painted constellations with an unnatural stillness, as if he saw not pigment, but memory itself. Lord Varkas presided, tall, gaunt, spectral in his ceremonial armor. At his left, Lady Morel clutched her prayer bead so tightly her knuckles shone white. Edrin, his eyes wide with both envy and apprehension, shifted restlessly beside her. The room pulsed with expectation and dread. A heavy gong sounded 3 times, a sound that seemed to drag through stone and bone alike. All voices hushed. Euron, keeper of the veil and lore master, began the invocation. His words rose and fell like a litany carved by centuries. In shadow were we born, by shadow are we blessed. May the mist find thee, and mark thee as its own. On signal, Seraphine advanced to the altar, a basin of obsidian veined with blue fire at its heart, and placed Abaddon atop its rim. The mist within shimmered thick and cold, swirling as if alive. The elders encircled the altar, each placing a hand upon its edge. From their fingertips, tendrils of black vapor uncoiled, drawn to the newborn like moths to flame. Abaddon's tiny fist opened. He reached for the mist, and in that instant, something changed. A sudden flare, blue-white and blinding, shot from the mist up Abaddon's arm, illuminating his features in stark relief. For a heartbeat, all else receded. Banners faded, torches guttered, even the carved runes along the floor seemed to shrink before that light. A collective gasp surged through the hall. Seraphine staggered back, eyes wide. The mist did not recoil from Abaddon as it had from the others. It surged toward him in a rapturous spiral, coiling around his limbs and chest like a living call. Within the haze, Abaddon's eyes snapped open, no longer pale blue, but burning with motes of impossible color. Indigo, violet, azure, brighter than midday sky. For a moment, he seemed impossibly ancient and immeasurably young all at once. The mist whispered through every corner of the hall. He hears us. He remembers what was forgotten. He is more than air, he is vessel. The elders recoiled. Lady Morel dropped her beads and knelt, trembling beside Varkas. Edrin's lips moved soundlessly as if reciting prayers he'd never learned. Euron's face had gone waxen pale beneath his hood. Varkas slammed his staff upon the stones. "Cease!" he commanded, though his voice shook despite decades of iron rule. The mist obeyed. The clouds recoiled and withdrew as if at some unspoken signal. Yet Abaddon had already been marked. On his brow lingered a faint sigil, an unbroken circle wreathed in blue fire, fading only when Seraphine gathered him into her arms once more. She looked down at her youngest brother and whispered, her lips close to his tiny ear, "You have seen what none should see so soon. Forgive us." The aftermath. The hall emptied slowly, some guests stealing glances over their shoulders as though expecting doom to follow in their footsteps. In shadowed corridors afterwards, servants exchanged hurried whispers. Words like omen and curse passed from ear to ear. That night at the family table was subdued. Edrin picked at his food in silence. Morel stared into her wine as if searching for auguries. Lord Varkas paced before the fireplace, his fingers clenched tight behind his back. Only Euron dared voice what all feared. It is not written in our chronicles for a child to bear such signs. The mist chose him. Varkas's lips curled in distaste. We rule Avernus. The mist serves us, not the other way. The mist serves no master, Seraphine replied softly. You felt its will tonight as keenly as I. A tense silence followed, broken only by the wind rattling panes above them. Morel's voice trembled. Will he be safe? Euron shook his head slowly. None who are marked by the veil ever are. But perhaps he is not meant for safety. The growth of shadows. Time passed. Abaddon grew beneath watchful eyes and heavier silences, while other children played in torch-lit courtyards or practiced blade forms under Edrin's tutelage. Abaddon was drawn to silence, to cold vaults and lonely parapets overlooking moor and mist. He did not babble as infants did. Instead, he listened, to wind through broken yew branches, to faint sighing beneath floorboards no one else could hear. When Seraphine sang him old lullabies, melodies winding around half-forgotten gods, the shadows on nursery walls seemed to dance in time with her voice. Sometimes they moved even after her song had ended. As seasons turned, Abaddon learned to walk, and when he did, it was always toward darkness, down spiral stairs into crypts others shunned, out along battlements high above swirling fogs. There were moments, fleeting but unforgettable, when power flickered about him unbidden. A servant found him staring into a mirror flecked with frost. For days after, their dreams were haunted by visions of endless moors beneath black stars. Once, during feast day rites, blue flames sprang from candlewicks nearest where Abaddon sat, burning cold, yet consuming nothing. Hushed panic gripped House Avernus when 3 crows struck dead at dawn were found at Abaddon's windowsill, yet by dusk their bodies vanished without trace. Seeds of doubt. The siblings grew wary around him. Edron watched with mingled resentment and reluctant fascination whenever Abaddon entered a room. Words died on his tongue as though choked by invisible hands. Morel prayed more fervently every night for their brother's soul and her own safety. Only Seraphine sought Abaddon out deliberately. She began teaching him old runes and stories, older still, the secret histories not spoken aloud in council chambers. The mist, she explained one dusk as they looked down together upon the moor, is older than our blood or name. We live because it allows us, and die when it forgets us. Abaddon nodded gravely. His eyes glimmered with that otherworldly sheen. But why did it choose me? He asked one evening when thunder rolled across distant hills. Seraphine hesitated, a rare break in her composure. "I do not know," she admitted at last. "I only know you must be careful whom you trust, mist or man." He pondered this deeply in his small heart, but somewhere within him a voice continued to murmur secrets, promises of power, warnings of hunger that could never be sated. The fever dream. One night, fever took Abaddon. Sweat soaked his sheets. Shadows writhed along the ceiling in patterns none could decipher. Seraphine sat at his bedside, while Euron traced sigils on the doorposts and burned bitter herbs to ward away spirits. In his delirium, Abaddon wandered hallways not built by mortal hands, vast corridors lined with mirrors reflecting nothing but endless blackness. He passed beneath arches carved from bone and ice, heard voices singing songs without melody or mercy. At last, he stood before a gate veiled in swirling mist. On its lintel was carved a single phrase, "There is no end, only change." As he reached out to touch it, something seized him, a presence vast and cold as death, yet not unkind. "You are ours," it whispered with countless tongues. "You are what will be remembered when all else is lost." He awoke screaming, the sound echoing through stone and soul alike. The rift within. Afterward, nothing seemed quite real to Abaddon, nor to those around him. His siblings now avoided him altogether. Even Seraphine looked uneasy when she met his gaze by firelight. Rumors spread among retainers that he could speak with wraiths, that he walked unharmed through walls thick with frost, that he drank nothing but water, drawn from wells near the source itself. Lord Varkas intensified training for all heirs, save Abaddon, insisting discipline would preserve what little normalcy remained, yet nothing could erase what had been seen that night at the altar. Euron confined himself to library stacks for days at a time. Ancient tomes piled high about him as he searched for precedent or prophecy that might explain Abaddon's fate. Once Edrin cornered Seraphine outside chapel doors. "Why do you spend time with him?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. "Sister, there are things about him I do not trust." She met his challenge evenly. "It is not about trust. It is about understanding." Edron spat on flagstones. "He is not like us." To which Seraphine replied, "No, he is not." An unseen bond. Yet, for all their wariness, none could deny strange fortune seemed to linger where Abaddon trod. Crops flourished where his shadow fell. Wolves avoided fields he crossed alone. On nights when mist pressed thick against keep walls, no ghost dared rise within House Avernus's halls. But with these gifts came darker omens. Bones unearthed near old standing stones grew brittle and cold at his touch. The ancient yews lining burial grounds twisted toward wherever he walked, as if seeking warmth or warning. On certain moonless nights, the mist would form swirling patterns beneath Abaddon's window, shapes that flickered between blessing and threat, depending on who beheld them. Seraphine alone understood some part of what was at work. "You are both shield and blade," she murmured one twilight, as the two stood looking down upon the endless moorland. "The mist has made you so, but you must choose what you become." Abaddon gazed into gathering dark. Within it, he saw both promise and peril, and knew neither would let him go untested. The first mark. As Abaddon reached his 7th year, the age when heirs first touched blade or rune before council, another ceremony was called. This time, no banners flew. Only closest kin and council elders gathered beneath vaulting arches, veiled with thin shrouds of fog, drawn from source itself. A simple rite. Each child must lay hand upon family sword, set before altar stone, and swear fealty, not merely to house or land, but to power beneath both. Adron went first, confident, if stiff. Morel after him, her hand shaking, yet determined. Then Abaddon approached, but as his palm touched cold metal, a shock raced through his body, not pain, but memory. 1,000 lives lived and lost within single heartbeat. Blue light coursed up sword blade, runes flickered along its hilt, shadows clustered thickly along floor at boy's feet. All present shrank back. Even Varkas faltered before regaining composure. Enough, he barked, but Abaddon's hand would not release blade until mist itself seemed satisfied. When at last he stepped away, an unspoken question weighed upon every brow. Had they welcomed protector or herald? Reflections in twilight. That night, Seraphine found her youngest brother atop North Tower parapet, the highest place above all Avernus lands, where only wind and clouds kept company with thought. He did not turn as she approached, only spoke softly. "Is there anything beyond mist?" She sat beside him on worn stone. Some say there is no world beyond it, others that those who pass through veil find truth or madness, depending on what they seek. He nodded slowly, eyes luminous in gathering dark. "I feel," he whispered, "that I am both gatekeeper and prisoner, but I do not know which is worse." Seraphine put an arm about his shoulder. "You are both, and neither. You are what you choose to become." Below them, mist curled in restless eddies across moorland, a ceaseless tide, neither wholly light nor dark, but forever changing shape around whatever heart dared claim it as home. And so legend grew, of a child marked by both blessing and curse, of shadows gathering for war yet held at bay by will alone, of House Avernus awaiting destiny, written not only in blood or blade, but in dreams spun from immortal fog. Beneath cloud-shrouded stars, Abaddon sat silently, as dawn crept cold across horizon, and wondered what farther secrets still slept within. The undying mist. Part 4. The Path Beneath Shadow. There is a place beneath the keep of Avernus where the stone itself breathes, a labyrinthine hollow, pressed close around the source, half forgotten by those who prefer the thin, cold clarity of order to the thickening pulse of ancient power. Here, the air is never still. Motes of dark vapor slither against the walls, and time itself seems to falter. Abaddon had discovered this place not by instruction, but by instinct. As other heirs rose at dawn to drill with sword and shield beneath Edrin's barking command, or knelt over dusty tomes with Morel reciting bloodlines and battle lore, he would slip from the refectory at first opportunity, descending ever deeper through corridors where torchlight failed. The mist welcomed him, not as master nor supplicant, but as kin. He sat cross-legged at the very lip of the source, where the earth fell away in a ragged maw, and the darkness roiled and whispered. His eyes, luminous with reflected gloom, were fixed on nothing. His mind wandered inwards, to a place neither mind nor muscle could reach. Sometimes he heard voices, echoes of past lords or of something older still. Sometimes he saw faces in the gloom, never quite friendly, never fully hostile. "You court madness," Varkas had told him once, finding him there after dusk with a flickering lamp and an anger barely contained. "The mist tests us all, but you invite it too close. It is not meant for living breath." Abaddon had not answered. He had only looked up at his uncle with that strange composure, too calm for a child, and Varkas had turned away, unsettled. No words could explain what Abaddon felt in these moments. The presence of the mist was not merely an emptiness or a hunger. It was a question. Something vast and uncertain pressed against the boundaries of his flesh and soul. He returned each evening, despite warnings and reprimands. When his siblings mocked him in the halls, Morel's voice sharp as broken glass, Edran's laughter echoing hollowly off stone, he answered only in silence. He did not join them on the training grounds. He did not celebrate minor victories or mourn trivial defeats. His world grew smaller, but it burrowed deeper. The rift between Abaddon and his family widened with each passing month. At council tables, his chair was left empty more often than not. When he did appear, he kept his head bowed and his counsel to himself. The elders whispered, some in fear, some in contempt. Was their youngest scion touched by greatness or doomed by folly? The mist played strange games with its chosen. Edran confronted him during a winter dusk, when frost veined the windows and darkness pressed hungrily against the keep's thin lamps. "Why do you shame us?" Edran's voice was tight, rehearsed. "Father expects you at drills. The house expects an heir worthy of its name." Abaddon met his brother's gaze without flinching. "I do not seek shame nor honor," he replied quietly. "There are duties beyond swordplay." Morel's voice cut in from behind, a shadow among shadows, always watching. "Duties to what? Ghosts and fog? You squander what others would die for." Abaddon's answer was a faint smile, sad more than proud. "Perhaps that is why it chooses me." Edran scoffed and turned sharply away. Morel lingered a moment longer, eyes narrowed, then vanished into the gloom. His mother, Lady Rowan, watched her youngest grow stranger by the season. In her own youth, she had braved the edge of the source during her night of proving. She had felt, not without terror, the caress of that slithering darkness along her thoughts. She knew its seductions. Yet Abaddon's bond was something else, deeper, more intimate, almost reciprocal. One night, she joined him at the edge of the abyss. "I fear what you become when you come here," she said softly, hands folded within her sleeves. He did not look at her, but she felt the mist stir at his presence, a low ripple, like a heartbeat beneath stone. "Do you fear for me?" he asked at last, "or for what I might awaken?" She hesitated. Truth demanded courage. Both. He inclined his head in acknowledgment, not quite gratitude, but recognition. Rowan laid a hand on his shoulder. "If you seek answers here, do not lose yourself within them." He considered this for a long time before replying, "To lose oneself is sometimes to find what cannot be sought elsewhere." The house grew restless with each day that Abaddon withdrew further into solitude. One evening, as thunder rolled far out across the moors and rain lashed black panes with frantic fingers, a council was called in the great hall. Edran stood tall at his father's right hand. Morel wore her ceremonial dress like chainmail. Even Seraphine was present, face unreadable in half-light. Varkas spoke first. Abaddon's path diverges from all that has sustained Avernus since time immemorial. You have seen the omens. His touch stirs the mist in ways unrecorded by any lore-keeper. We cannot allow uncertainty so near to our bloodline's heart. Rowan's voice was steady, but tinged with pain. He is our kin. The mist's favor is never gentle, but it has saved us before. Edron's jaw clenched, not at this cost. He undermines morale. He makes us weak before vassals and rivals alike. Seraphine leaned forward then, her words soft but clear. And if his difference is what saves us next time, would you shackle a blade because it cuts too deep? The debate raged as torches sputtered against wind-pushed draft. At last, Lord Avalar, aging patriarch, rose with effort from his seat. "We are Avernus," he said. "We do not discard those marked by fate, even when they terrify us." He pinned Varkas with a stare colder than midwinter stone. But we do not let them wander unchecked either. Outside, lightning forked through low clouds. Inside, divisions thickened like frost across old glass. Abaddon knew something of this council. News traveled fast through servants' corridors. But he paid it little heed. That night, he sat again beside the churning fissure as darkness thickened and midnight drew near. The mist lapped at his boots with possessive affection. Strange lights flickered in its depths, runes or memories or both. He closed his eyes and let himself drift. At first there was only silence, the endless hush of secrets too vast for language. Then came a whisper, not words but impressions. Pain, hope, hunger, longing, all braided together like shadows spun from wind. He became aware of himself standing at a crossroads. One path led back toward hearth and kin and all that tradition promised, certainty laced with duty. The other faded into fog, unknown territory where rules were written anew by each step taken. "Who are you?" came a voice, not from within nor from without, but everywhere at once. Abaddon opened his mind to answer, but found no single reply would suffice. He glimpsed visions, Avernus burning under foreign banners, pale hands pressing against glassy stone, warriors broken upon fields where no sun ever rose, yet also himself standing resolute atop blackened battlements as mist swept outward like wings unfurled, protector or scourge or both. Awakening was sudden, a shudder running through flesh and earth alike. The fissure pulsed blue-violet. Stone cracked beneath his palm where it met raw power. He gasped for breath as if surfacing from cold water. A shape coalesced before him, a wraith-like figure formed from mist itself, neither male nor female nor wholly human. It regarded him without eyes. "You are ready," it said, voice echoing with myriad undertones. Tenderness and threat entwined. "For what?" Abaddon whispered back. The thing tilted what might have been its head. "To choose whether you serve or command the legacy you bear." Then it unraveled into smoke, leaving ash-gray motes drifting on unseen current. In days following, changes crept through Abaddon's presence like silent fire. Where once he walked unnoticed, the overlooked third child, servants now shied from his gaze. Horses reared in their stalls as he passed. Dogs whined and slunk away. Even Edron caught himself pausing before issuing orders to his brother. A hesitation thin as cobweb but real all the same. Morel watched with a scholar's eye. the kind that seeks not truth, but pattern. She began trailing him through shadowed halls and storm-slick courtyards, careful never to be seen outright, yet always near enough to witness something. One evening, she confronted him as he returned from the depths below. "You change," she said simply, not accusation, but observation. "So must we all," Abaddon replied wearily. "But you change in ways none have before." Her eyes flashed, a blend of envy and fear. "Will you bring ruin on this house?" He shook his head once. "Only if clinging to old shapes brings ruin first." She studied him then, as one might study a rare flower growing atop a grave, and let him pass without further word. Winter deepened. Snow fell upon the moors in heavy silence, muting even the wind's ceaseless lament. Still Abaddon sought out the source each day, sometimes for hours on end, until frost bit blue into his fingers. Once he lay atop bare earth beside the fissure and breathed in cold vapor until thoughts blurred into dreamscape. He stood at war on fields rimed with black ice, mist writhing around him like living armor as spears broke against its shroud. Behind him, banners burned. Before him, enemies melted into nothingness beneath his outstretched hand. But somewhere, amidst all this grandeur, a terrible loneliness gnawed unceasingly at his core. He woke, gasping, heart pounding, with tears frozen on his cheeks. At last, something broke within House Averest, a tension stretched too taut for too long. Varkas called Abaddon before the council once more, this time not for censure, but for ultimatum. "You will take up arms," Varkas declared, before assembled kin and counselors gathered under banners heavy with age-old dust. "You will prove yourself as all heirs must, or relinquish your claim to this house forevermore." Abaddon considered, could feel mist coiling hungrily about his wrists where they rested atop ancient wood. "No," he said at length, voice quiet but iron cord. Shock rippled through the chamber. Even Lord Avalar straightened in disbelief. "I will not fight as others do," Abaddon continued evenly. "I will defend Averest, but on terms dictated by what I have learned below." Varkas spat. "You would make us slaves to superstition." Abaddon looked past him, through banners and bloodlines alike, toward Seraphine, seated silent beside Morel. She met his gaze without flinching. After a long pause, she nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Lord Avalar spoke last. "Very well. Let us see if destiny values innovation over tradition." So it was decided. Abaddon would not march at dawn alongside brothers and sisters clad in mail. Instead, he would stand sentinel over the source itself, the first to do so since the founding days of legend, armed only with what mysteries he could summon from darkness below. Nights grew longer. Within Keep's oldest tower, Seraphine found her brother brooding over cryptic runes scratched into ancient stonework, a diary kept not in words but symbols, known only to those who listened closely enough to hear beyond silence. "You risk everything by walking alone," she murmured as storm rattled glass overhead. "Averest survives because each part upholds the rest." "I am not alone," Abaddon replied, his tone soft, yet carrying weight of stone dragged across graveyard earth. "The mist is always here, and perhaps so are you." She smiled faintly, reaching out to draw cloak tighter about his shoulders. "Learn all you can, but remember, even legends need allies." They sat together listening to rain and wind weave old songs through cracks in ancient mortar. Two souls poised at edge of transformation, neither fully understood nor wholly feared. Below them, far beneath stone and root and bone, the mist circled ever closer around its chosen sun, waiting for day when tradition and defiance would meet upon field wreathed in immortal fog, and House Avernus would learn whether legacy is merely inheritance or something claimed by those who dare to listen when darkness speaks their name. Part 5. The Covenant of the Black Mist. The passage of days within the House of Avernus was a thing measured not in hours, but in shadows. Seasons shifted almost imperceptibly beneath the sullen sky, and throughout the keep a hush had fallen, part anticipation, part dread. The council's decision had been rendered, Abaddon's fate sealed not by sword or decree, but by his own defiant claim upon the darkness that flowed beneath their feet. For a time, he was left alone. He dwelled near the source, where few dared linger. Night and day bled together in a perpetual twilight, broken only by the wind's restless laments and the ceaseless silent stirring of the black mist. Here, Abaddon made his vigil. His armor, once a family heirloom passed down and battered by generations, had become something else entirely. Its pauldrons etched with runes that shimmered with a bruised indigo light. Its breastplate veined like living marble, pulsing when he drew near to the chasm. He no longer needed torches to see. The world was rendered for him in gradients of shadow and memory. The mist knew him now, knew him as it had known none before, not even the ancient founders whose names were lost to all but myth. He did not eat. He did not sleep, not as men do. Instead, he listened. The first nights he heard only whispers, the ghosts of old kin, the weeping of roots strangled in stone. But as he learned to let himself drift upon the currents of vapor, new voices arose, words without tongue or throat, intoning riddles in a language felt more than understood. They spoke of cycles and endings, of debts owed and paid in blood and silence. He asked questions within himself. What am I becoming? The mist replied with a cold certainty. You are what we have waited for. News filtered slowly through Avernus. Border fires burning crimson on the moors. The banners of House Veer unfurling beside that of the exiled razor-spine clans. Raiders swept from the east. Mercenaries and oath-breakers who believed Avernus weak, led by tales that its scions were fractured and its legacy rotting. Counselors gathered in secret, voicing their fears behind closed doors. He refuses to lead, spat Varkas, knuckles white upon the hilt of his sword. He skulks like a ghost while our enemies gather. Let him, murmured Seraphine, her eyes cool as rain on black glass. He is not bound by your fears. Let us see what the mist has chosen. Morel, weary beyond her years, merely shook her head. If he falls, so does all our hope. When the attack finally came, it was swift and brutal, a torrent unleashed beneath a moonless sky. The enemy swept across the barren fields with iron and fire. Their war cries shattered the silence. Their arrows fell like locusts upon outer walls. From high battlements, defenders loosed their own bolts in reply, yet were outnumbered 3-1. Abaddon stood alone beside the source as horns sounded and chaos broke upon the ramparts. He did not move at first. He felt the surge of pain and terror outside, his kin dying as they clung to tradition. Steel for steel, shield for shield, the black mist swelled at his feet. It wound about his ankles and wrists like supplicant hands. "Go," it breathed, not command, but covenant. He stepped forward and vanished into shadow. To those on the field that night, what followed would never be spoken of without tremor. First came a sudden hush, a pause in the din as some primal sense of danger swept through both armies. Then darkness spilled from the heart of Averest, not mere gloom or fog, but an absolute obliteration of light that spread outward in ripples, swallowing torch flames and moonbeams alike. Figures emerged within it, at first only one, Abaddon, moving as if through water thick with memory. The mist coiled about him with sentient affection, barbed tendrils reaching out to touch each foe in turn. "Stand!" shouted a razor-spined champion, raising his great axe high. "Face me!" Abaddon gazed through him as through glass. The mist surged, a gesture as simple as breathing, and where it passed, armor blackened and flesh shriveled to gray husks. Life bled away with a sound like sighing wind. Death was gentle, implacable. Others tried to run, arrows loosed blindly into nothingness, but they found themselves mired in vapor so cold it burned. Those who struck at Abaddon found their blades glancing from unseen barriers or falling from numbed fingers altogether. Yet not all faced doom. There were wounded defenders, too, soldiers bleeding out upon the trampled earth. Where Abaddon passed among them, the vapor gathered at his heels, wounds closed as if unmade by time itself. Dying breaths caught back in grateful lungs. Avernian voices called his name, not with reverence, but awe, edged by fear. "My son," whispered Lord Avalar from atop the wall, seeing what had been wrought below. On that battlefield, legend crystallized before mortal eyes. When dawn crept reluctantly across soiled fields, the dead lay scattered, enemy ranks broken and routed in their flight. None could say how many had fallen to sword or arrow. Far more had simply faded away within that immortal fog. Abaddon stood in the midst of it all, unscathed, unmoved, save for a faint paleness at his brow. The mist clung to him still, no longer armor or cloak, but something woven through bone and thought, a presence both guardian and judge. The victors gathered hesitantly around him, battered soldiers, counselors atop trembling horses. Even Varkas approached, his pride smoldering in defiance. "What are you?" he demanded. Abaddon fixed him with eyes rimed in frost and shadow. "I am Averest," he said softly, and all heard it ring like prophecy. Word spread through the house with feverish haste. Some called him blessed, others whispered of abomination. Children peered from behind doorways when he passed. Elders touched wards and muttered prayers against things that had no name. In council, they argued long into night. "He saved us," said Morel, voice raw but unyielding. "At what cost?" barked Varkas. "He wields death as a child wields fire." Seraphine spoke last, a single sentence that silenced all. "He is what we made him." And so divisions deepened, a house united by blood, yet riven by fear of its own salvation. That night, Abaddon sat alone beside Seraphine on the parapet above the courtyard. The mist drifted lazily in moonlight, no longer predatory, but almost contemplative. "I felt them die," he murmured, not proud nor regretful, simply certain. I felt them return as well. She watched him closely. Is it pain you feel, or power? He closed his eyes. For a moment, he was merely her brother again, lost boy, haunted by dreams beneath ancestral stone. I do not know, he admitted. Perhaps both. She reached for his hand, found it cold but steady. We do not choose what we become, she said softly, only how we live with it. He nodded, letting silence settle between them like an old friend. Below them, preparations continued. Soldiers tending wounds both visible and unseen. Banners, once torn, now mended anew. Prayers offered to old gods whose names had been dust before Averest was born. Yet something fundamental had shifted within Abaddon and within all who called these haunted lands home. In days that followed, none dared challenge Abaddon's claim, not openly. The council yielded to necessity. Warriors honored him with offerings of black iron and root wine. Yet among themselves they debated, was he savior or herald of doom? Abaddon took little notice of their scheming. He wandered halls empty even when crowded, a figure apart from all except Seraphine and sometimes Morel. Old places drew him, crypts thick with undisturbed dust, armories hung with rusted mail. Most often he returned to the source itself, drawn by a need deeper than hunger or rest. There he communed with what dwelled beneath, shapes half seen coiling behind the fissure, memories of ancestors whose voices sang in counterpoint with those of the mist. Why do you protect them? One shadow asked, not cruelly, but with honest curiosity. Abaddon knelt at the brink of darkness. A king bowed before a throne older than kingship itself. Because I am theirs, and they are mine. The mist shivered in assent. Not all wounds could be healed, even by power undreamt of. Among his kin suspicion festered slow and poisonous. Old jealousies found new fuel in rumor and fear. Some whispered that Abaddon sought dominion over life and death, that he would soon forget what it meant to be human at all. Only Seraphine kept faith unbroken, visiting him under pretense of counsel, but truly seeking kinship amid storm-tossed night. You are changing, she told him one evening, as wind rattled shutters and shadows danced long on stone. Will you remember us when you are more mist than man? He smiled, a rare expression now, but genuine. I remember every moment, he said quietly. It is all I truly possess. They sat thus until dawn's reluctant gold seeped through clouded windows, brother and sister poised between legacy and legend. Winter advanced across Averest. Frost rhymed banners and lances alike. Breath hung heavy as soldiers trained beneath Seraphine's vigilant gaze. Yet none now doubted who ruled these lands, not merely as lord by birthright, but as something closer to myth incarnate. Abaddon watched over them all, sometimes a distant silhouette upon high walls, sometimes a shadow gliding silent among mist-wreathed fields, always present where need was greatest, and always alone when dusk fell deepest. His power grew subtler with each passing day, no longer just destruction or healing, but something stranger still, an empathy threaded through every breath of fog that blanketed moor and keep alike. He knew when children cried themselves to sleep for nightmares seen only in rain-streaked glass, when warriors faltered at memory of friends lost to blade or bitterness, when hope flickered uncertain between hearthstones grown cold by exile or grief. Sometimes he acted, appearing unbidden at bedsides or on ramparts where death seemed ready to claim another soul. Other times he watched and mourned silently for burdens none could share. Thus was forged a new covenant between House Avernus and its dark inheritance, between Abaddon and that which dwelled within and beyond the black mist, between past tradition and future possibility, yet unnamed. One night, when clouds pressed low enough to snuff even moon's pale glow, a figure stole across outer courtyards toward the source. Varkas himself, armor buckled hastily over tunic, still stained from battle's aftermath. Abaddon awaited him beneath ancient yew trees whose roots coiled deep into rock beside the fissure's edge. "You come seeking answers," Abaddon intoned, not question, but statement inevitable as rain. Varkas hesitated only a moment before drawing near. "I come to see if you are still my kin," he said harshly, the words shaking despite all effort at pride. Abaddon regarded him without anger or pity, only understanding ancient as dawn itself. "We are bound by more than blood," he replied. "When you stood upon these stones long ago, you chose duty over fear." Varkas's shoulders sagged beneath invisible weight. "I have seen men turned to dust by your hand," he confessed bitterly. "I have seen wounds unmade at your touch, yet I cannot decide if you are healer or harbinger." Abaddon knelt before him, not in fealty, but solidarity. "I am both," he said simply, "as are we all." For a moment they remained thus, two heirs shaped and scarred by history none could rewrite, bound together not by certainty, but by the necessity of faith amid darkness unending. And so House Avernus endured in fear, awe, hope, and Abaddon became its living covenant, not ruler nor slave, but vessel for power older than words could name or minds dare grasp. Each night he walked between worlds, guardian to those who trusted him, doom to those who dared breach sacred boundaries, enigma even to himself when dreams threatened to swallow memory whole. Above all else, the black mist circled ever closer around its chosen son, waiting for a day when legend would become law, when House Avernus would decide if legacy meant clinging to shadows or learning, at last, to walk within them, hand in hand with whatever darkness whispered their name from below. End of Part 5. Part 6. The Blades of Shadow and Blood. The dawns in Avernus came slow, if they came at all, waking not with color, but with a subtle fading of dark, the mist thinning just enough to reveal the angular sprawl of house and land. On such a morning, the halls of Avernus echoed with a rare anticipation. Something ancient was to be remembered, something old was to be reforged. First, the Council and the Chronicle. The great hall was hung with banners, their faded sigils undulant in a draught scented by cold iron and peat. At the long obsidian table sat the Council of Elders, faces lined like the bark of yew trees, eyes agleam with the knowledge of centuries. Abaddon stood apart, his form wreathed always in a hint of shadow, as if the black mist lingered about him in deference. Beside him sat Varkas, grim and silent since that night by the source. Elsewhere, younger kin watched, tense and uncertain. Upon the table lay 3 sword scabbards, one empty, one plain, one wrapped tight in cloth black as night beneath new moon. Elder Madron spoke first, his voice as brittle as frost on stone. It is time to speak of the swords. Their history is ours. Their fate, perhaps, will decide our own. Elder Cassira nodded, drawing forth a heavy tome bound in hide. Read, she intoned to Abaddon, for you must know not only the weight of your power, but those who bore it before you. Abaddon inclined his head and opened the chronicle. The script within writhed and shimmered as if resisting mortal sight. But he read aloud, and the room filled with memory. The second blade, Glomrend. The tale began with fire and thunder, a siege upon Averest by invaders from beyond the moors, their banners bright against the endless dusk. In desperation, it was said, an ancestor named Seric of the Bound Circle had brought his family's sword to the edge of the source itself. No ordinary blade this, Glomrend, forged in elder days when blood still sealed pacts between earth and sky. Yet Seric knew it lacked what was needed to stand against the unnatural host at their gates. He knelt beside the black fissure as storms gathered above. If you are curse or blessing, see me now. He prayed aloud to whatever dwelt below. Let my blood be price for our salvation. He pressed blade and palm together, letting crimson drip onto steel, then thrust Glomrend into the pulsing heart of the source. The air screamed, mist billowed forth in choking tides, and when Seric drew forth his sword anew, it shone with an opalescent darkness that drank the light itself. On the field that followed, Glomrend neither dulled nor broke. Where it passed, wounds would not bleed. Where it parried, flame guttered and died. But its bearer paid a price. Each swing leached color from Seric's eyes, until at last they were pools of midnight. The invaders fell or fled. Seric lived, but his voice was lost, never spoken again from that day onward. The third sword, the nameless one. Cassira's voice dropped low as she turned another page. The second blade, its tale is less clear. Whispers haunted the room. Some named it shadow glass, others called it nothing at all. This sword was forged for a younger sibling, always overlooked, always watching from gloomed corners. The chronicles remembered neither victories nor betrayal attached to this weapon. It passed through hands quietly, a tool for those who kept the ledges of Averest or watched for spies in the fog. Yet there were rumors that in its hilt swirled a fragment of mist too wild to be tamed, that its steel was sharpest when wielded for secrets rather than glory, that more than one blood feud ended with its silent stroke in moonless hours. No record told who last bore it, no record marked its final resting place. Of all the heirlooms of Averest, this was least loved, and perhaps therefore most dangerous. The lost blade, Night Shard. Then came the third scabbard, the empty one. It was Varkas who spoke this time, voice raw with memory. Night Shard, he said, the blade that should have been mine. A hush fell. Even the mists seemed to press closer against black glass windows. Varkas recounted how Night Shard was forged not in ceremony, but urgency, drawn hastily from a vein of meteoric iron unearthed during a quake near the source. It was lighter than thought and darker than pitch. Some said it drank dreams from restless sleepers when exposed to starless skies. When war threatened anew, Night Shard was given to Varkas as a sign of trust. Yet something about its hunger for battle unsettled him. Its edge hummed under his touch, eager for conflict. On a night when lightning crawled across the moors and Enemies closed in under cover of storm. Nightshard vanished. Some whispered betrayal. Others blamed the mists themselves for swallowing blade and master at once. Varkas alone returned, hands empty and eyes haunted. Its fate remained unknown. V. The rite of reforging. The council's tales ended. Silence weighed upon every brow. Abaddon lifted Glomrend, now little more than a shadowy hilt since its last battle, and stepped toward the source beneath tangled yew roots outside. Elders followed at a wary distance. Varkas trailed last. At the fisssure's edge, Abaddon bent low, holding Glomrend over vapors that roiled like living things reaching skyward. He spoke not aloud, but inwardly, calling not only on his birthright, but upon whatever consciousness lurked within black fog and ancient stone. I seek not mastery, he thought, but understanding. Mist coiled around blade and arm, cool as silk, yet heavy as regret. A glow began beneath Abaddon's skin. Runes inked in childhood rites flicker into life. Suddenly, the mist surged upward in a spiral, a column dense enough to blot out sight and sound. The blade trembled. Alien whispers curled through Abaddon's mind, promises and warnings both. He pressed onward. Glomrend sank into the source once more, lightless fire sparking at its point of contact. Pain lanced through him, every memory torn open anew. First blood shed by ancestors, banishment of kin, joyless coronations, even Varkas's shadowed accusation. He did not let go. When at last he withdrew the sword, Glomrend had changed. Its core shimmered with reflected stars. Along its length danced tendrils that flickered between a substance and void. It felt heavy and alive. Sixth, the vision. As Abaddon staggered back from the fissure's edge, vision overtook him. He stood upon a desolate plain, far from Averest, yet unmistakably shaped by sorrow. 3 swords hovered above cracked earth, their forms wavering between present and possible futures. Glomrend, held aloft by a figure crowned in shadow and flame, the Nameless One, cradled by faceless hands, many hands, each marked by secret scars. Nightshard, spinning endlessly above emptiness, its point aimed toward Abaddon's own heart. A voice boomed, not mist or memory, but something vaster. 3 blades for 3 fates, each severing or binding a piece of what must come. Abaddon tried to speak, but found no tongue or teeth, only resolve that burned within his breast like bitter wine. 7th, the reckoning. He awoke, gasping. Above him loomed Varkas, concern warring with suspicion in his eyes. "What did you see?" demanded Kassira from behind them all. Abaddon struggled to describe it. Paths forked. None lead only to victory or peace. He hefted Glomrend, the sword shimmering faintly even in dawnless gloom. Each blade holds part of our doom or our deliverance. The council conferred in urgent whispers. Should they search for Nightshard? Should they send spies for word of the Nameless One? Or should all eyes remain fixed on Abaddon, their hope and their terror? Abaddon pressed Glomrend into Varkas's grip, surprising them both. "It must not be mine alone," he said softly. "If we are to survive what comes, none may walk shadowed paths untested." Varkas turned the blade over in his hands. For a moment, mist crawled along his fingers, but did not burn. A spark of kinship flickered between them, shared pain, transformed into possibility. Eighth, echoes and oaths. As day bled once more into twilight, such as it was in this place, word spread through House Averest that Glomrand lived again, that black mist had chosen anew how it would mingle with flesh and steel. Some rejoiced, others shuddered at what such a weapon might demand next. Meanwhile, agents were dispatched, one toward forgotten catacombs where ledger-keepers once sharpened knives in silence, another over storm-swept moors where Nightshard might lie buried beneath centuries of grief. Abaddon stood at his window long after all lamps had guttered out, watching mist curl around banners old as sin. He whispered, not in fear or command, but in hope half remembered. We are not what we were, nor need we be what they made us. And somewhere far below, in root and rift, the black mist listened and waited. So dawns another chapter for House Averest, with swords reforged, truths unearthed, and old wounds open but unforgotten. For as long as mist veils stone, the story endures, and legend waits to choose whose hand will next draw blades in shadow or in light. Part 7. The Will of the Black Mist. I dread in the dawnless gloaming. It was said that in Averest, night and day were but two colors in the same bruise, one faded, the other deepening. Yet even for dwellers accustomed to such gloom, what dawned in those days was an unnatural heaviness, an expectancy, as though the whole house braced for a storm whose thunder had not yet reached their ears. The return of Glomrand, reforged and alive with the breath of the source, was not an omen easily dismissed. Whispers threaded the halls. Old banners seemed to sag with apprehension. Some servants would not walk alone at night, swearing they saw mist pouring under doors where none had ever pooled before. In his high, cold chamber, Abaddon felt none of the triumph he had been raised to crave. Instead, he stood at the edge of sleep and waking, awareness drawn ever inward by the slow, relentless pull of the black mist. There, at the border of self and shadow, he sensed a presence, a gravity more ancient than hate. On the third night after his vision, that presence grew insistent. He did not resist, as the mist bled through stone and skin alike, its tendrils gentle as a mother's hand and pitiless as fate itself. You seek to command, it whispered, not in words, but in memory and blood. But will you yield? 1,000 images flickered. Ancestors cut down on nameless fields. Children lifted into the fog, marked for greatness or oblivion. A blade raised in defiance, and then lowered in surrender. Abaddon did not speak. He simply was, suspended between defiance and awe. And the mist, unknowable, unbowed, accepted his silence. The field of broken shields. Come morning, if such a word held meaning here, word reached Abaddon that Varkas and a small company had returned from the borderlands. They brought with them something stranger than rumor. 3 survivors from a skirmish on the Fenridge, the boundary where Averest met lands neither loyal nor hostile. All 3 were silent as stones, faces locked in rictuses of dread. Their armor was pitted with blackened holes, not from flame or blade, but as though gnawed by rot itself. The captain who brought them shook his head. No arrows, no wounds, yet they bleed from within. Abaddon knelt beside one survivor, a girl no older than himself, when first he felt the mist's touch. Her eyes were glassy, lips moving soundlessly. He took her hand. It was cold, too cold. "Tell me," he whispered, voice low enough for only her spirit to hear. "What did you meet out there?" Her mouth stirred. A single word escaped, a wisp, a breath. "Mist." A shudder ran through Abaddon's heart. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Third, the unmaking. They brought the 3 survivors to the old crypts below the keep, a place shunned by most for reasons even they no longer remembered. Here Abaddon gathered his council, Kessera, whose sharp tongue masked a loyalty as fierce as winter, Varkas, who still bore Glomrend and refused to leave the blade unsheathed, and 2 of the elder scribes, their faces hidden by deep hoods. "What do you hope to achieve?" Kessera asked quietly as they watched Abaddon enter the crypt alone. "To know if we command the mist," he replied, "or if it commands us." The girl lay upon a slab inscribed with runes, so worn only touch could read them. At Abaddon's presence, mist curled from the stone itself. Hungry, searching, he placed his hand above her heart and summoned the mist within. For an instant she convulsed. Shadows wrapped her form until flesh and spirit seemed woven together by darkness. Then, for a heartbeat, the mist recoiled, not from her suffering, from him. He felt it, a resistance deeper than defiance, a will that would not be bent even by its own vessel. Abaddon staggered back, breath ragged. "You are not my master." The truth rang like iron struck upon stone. The paradox of power. Word of what transpired spread quickly through Avernus. Elders gathered in secret to debate its meaning. If the black mist could heal, yet refuse to heal, if it could devour, yet choose its prey, what then was Abaddon but another supplicant before a god too vast and capricious to heed prayers? Some urged caution. "Let us seal the source again," one whispered. "Let us bury what we cannot command." Others, a younger breed, argued for audacity. "If we cannot rule the mist by will alone, then let us court its favor through action. Let us become its chosen champions, its scions, not its slaves." Varkas, ever pragmatic, pressed Glomrend into Abaddon's hand as proof of kinship between sword and bearer. "The blade answers your call," he said. "The mist answers your need." But even he saw the tremor in Abaddon's grip, the uncertainty that no steel could dispel. Kessera watched from shadows, her gaze fixed not on Abaddon, but on the silent crypt beneath their feet. She alone seemed to understand that some pacts were older than words, and some prices paid not in blood, but in choice denied. The battle at Fenridge. Soon enough, events forced hesitation into action. One cold dusk, horns sounded from the watchtowers strung along Fenridge Moor. A host gathered beyond their borders, mercenaries hired by jealous kin from distant courts, those who coveted Avernus's secret strength but feared its curse. They came clad in burnished plate and crimson tabards, torches raised against the gloom as if fire could banish mist. Abaddon rode at the head of Avernus's vanguard, not for pride or glory, but because no one else dared touch what he now bore within him. Varkas was at his side. Behind rode Kessera and 50 sworn blades. The enemy's charge broke against a wall of midnight vapor that rolled across Fenridge like a living tide. Swords flashed, then vanished into nothingness as black mist surged between combatants. Where arrows fell, they dissolved mid-flight. Where steel met flesh, wounds either closed in an instant or festered into black pits that consumed light itself. It was chaos, but not blind chaos. The mist moved with intention, here shielding Avernian warriors from certain death, there allowing enemy captains to fall without mercy, elsewhere swallowing whole squadrons only to disgorge them raving and broken-eyed at their own rear. Abaddon felt every pulse of it, each agony and ecstasy threading through his veins as though he were both general and battlefield at once. He called for healing where comrades fell, and some rose renewed, wounds closing over as if they had never bled at all. He willed destruction upon those who threatened his kin, and sometimes they simply ceased to be, erased from memory as well as form, their absence echoing louder than any death cry. Yet always there was resistance, a flicker of refusal at the heart of every command. Sixth, the limits of dominion. As dusk deepened into utter dark, Abaddon found himself face to face with a mercenary captain clad head to toe in runed silver, armor meant to repel all unnatural things. Mist coiled around Abaddon like a cloak. Glomrend pulsed with hidden stars along its blade. The captain laughed, a hollow sound behind his visor. Think you can command what even gods abandon? The mist is no ally to mortals. Abaddon raised Glomrend and issued no command this time. Instead, he opened himself wholly to the will behind the mist. For a single instant, longer than life, shorter than regret, he glimpsed what it saw. All flesh as fleeting sparks, all power borrowed and brittle, all oaths weighed against a darkness deeper than death itself. In that space between heartbeat and oblivion, the mist chose and swept forward not at Abaddon's call, but at its own. The captain screamed as silver turned to rust, then dust, his shadow torn away first, his body following after, until nothing remained but an echo and silence where arrogance had dwelled. Abaddon staggered, not from exhaustion but awe. He knew now he was vessel, not master, agent, not author, of powers whose mercy was indistinguishable from malice, whose justice cut both ways. Seventh shadows over Avernus. When dawn, or something like it, crept across Fenridge, Avernus stood unbowed, but forever changed. Victory was total, yet tasted of ashes. Their enemies routed or destroyed, their own dead numbered few, but those who fell did so without mark or trace. Some families would never know what became of sons or sisters lost in mist's embrace. In the aftermath, Abaddon walked among survivors, healing some with a touch, comforting others with words he barely believed himself. Kassira found him standing alone atop a rise overlooking the moor, the source faintly visible on the horizon as a wound that could never heal. "You won," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No one wins here," he replied. "Not truly." She studied him for a long moment. "Will you try to master it again?" Abaddon smiled, a shadow's curve of lips. "I think it is not mastery we must seek, but understanding, or failing that, endurance." She nodded, not in resignation, but respect. "Then House Avernus endures with you." Far below, in root and rift, the black mist listened and did not answer, but waited anew on whose command, if any, it might next arise. Eighth Epilogue. The Weight of Shadows. In weeks that followed, songs were sung and stories told. of how Avernus turned back an army with little more than mist and myth. Some called it miracle, others muttered darker names: curse, desecration, the first act of some greater doom yet to come. Abaddon grew in stature among his people, not loved, perhaps, but revered, and just a little bit feared, for all knew now that in Avernus no blade was dead, no wound certain, no command absolute, save for that cast by a deeper darkness that neither shield nor oath could ever truly contain. And beneath banners old as sin, under skies forever bruised by twilight, the story endured of House Avernus, of black mist, and of one who learned at last that sometimes the greatest power is knowing what cannot be owned, only born. Thus closed another chapter for House Avernus, with victory earned at terrible cost, truths revealed but never tamed, and old bargains renewed, where shadow waits upon stone, and legend lingers as both shield and sentence for those who dare to walk amid the veils of Avernus. Part 8. The Shadow Crowned. Legends and Echoes. 1. The Silence After. Avernus did not know peace. Not truly, not ever. But after the vanquishing of Fenridges would-be conquerors, a hush lingered in the land, thick as the lingering mist. The moors bore the memory of conflict in silence. No carrion birds came to claim the fallen, for there were none left to claim. Even the wind seemed to carry its voice with care, lest it waken what slept beneath. But it was not only the land that had changed. In hearth and hall, in the murmured prayers before the cold altar, a new refrain passed from lips cracked by wind and fear. Abaddon endures, not as a hope, nor quite a promise, as a warning. For as word spread through border villages, scattered tenant farms, and to the distant keeps of erstwhile enemies, a legend took root, untamed, growing in each retelling, swelling with awe and dread. The Lord of Avernus had not simply repelled an army. He had become something else. The house and its shadows. Within the keep, Abaddon walked among his kin like a figure half remembered from a fever dream, pale as old marble, yet moving with a vitality that unsettled even the oldest retainers. Rumor claimed his eyes now shone with that inward opalescent light even at noon. Others swore they'd seen him speak to shadows, call them by name. Children hid in passageways to glimpse him, whispering tales older than their grandmothers. Abaddon walked into death and came back. They say you can't cut him. Blade turns to fog. He's not a man anymore. He's the mist. At supper, elders exchanged wary glances over bread and salted meat. The matriarch Cassira, Abaddon's aunt, spoke softly to her brother. He bears our mark, but carries something deeper, something none of us can command. The old lord shook his head, or outlast, all could feel it, a new weight pressing down upon House Avernus. Not the burden of rule, but of legend budding into something monstrous, a shadow that would not be contained by banners or stone. Third, across the land, fear and reverence. Beyond the keep, stories outran even the swiftest riders. Minstrels turned skirmish into song, embellishing each retelling, until Abaddon's presence upon the field grew to mythic proportions. Some said he commanded the wraiths of all who ever fell on Avernus ground, others that he bore death's own crown, a circlet of black fire. In the taverns of Vulgate and along the trade roads winding toward Corman's Reach, merchants exchanged wary looks. I heard he cannot die. Aye, nor can those who serve him. Their wounds close before your eyes. One grizzled mercenary spat into the rushes. 'Tis no man does that. No mortal line. That's a curse upon those hills. Best keep your distance. Yet, for every tale of dread, others whispered of miracles. Farmers found blight receding from fields that bordered Avernus lands. Orphans were taken in by silent riders whose eyes gleamed with silver motes. Some considered these gifts. Others wondered what price they carried. But always, at the heart of reverence, was fear. Fourth, the unchallenged. No warlord moved against Avernus that season. Armies lingered at borders but dared not cross. Emissaries sent gifts instead of threats, their letters couched in tones of respect, bordering on supplication. In distant halls, rival nobles debated strategy. "It cannot be allowed," hissed Lady Elithra of the Red Spire, "one who claims dominion over life and death. He makes us all vassals." "You try to take it from him," replied her captain darkly. But none did, not yet, for to face Abaddon was to face more than a man or his house, more than steel or sorcery. It was to stand before mystery itself, to measure one's resolve against something older and colder than any king made law. The old songs, parallels, and echoes. In secret gatherings, lore masters dusted their tomes and compared notes by candlelight. "His name is an old one," rasped Brother Aldrich in the archives beneath Elt Marrow Cathedral. "Abaddon appears in forbidden glossaries. The Destroyer, Angel of the Bottomless Pit. He traced trembling fingers along a page dense with inked sigils, and there rose smoke from the abyss. And they had over them a king whose name in the ancient tongue is Abaddon." Others recalled older myths still, tales from before script or tongue, of kings who wore crowns woven from night, of shepherds who led their people into shadow for protection from greater horrors, of those who bargained with mists and returned marked by powers uncaring and absolute. Some among the learned debated whether Abaddon was man or myth reborn, an echo from the world's first dawn, playing again upon mortal stage. And in Avernus itself, elders gathered children round for tales far older than any living memory. He is as Orpheon among the dead. He knows their names, and they follow his call. He is like Anku, who rides at dusk to gather those whose time has come, or like Hades beneath, who rules where souls drift dark as silt upon black riverbeds. Each story was part truth and part warning. To touch such power is not to hold it, but to be changed by it forever. Sixth, the arrival of outsiders. It was inevitable that such legends would draw more than awe-struck peasants or plotting lords. They came first as rumors, a traveler on the southern moor who bore neither banner nor crest, but whose staff bled ink at his touch, a monkey-faced trickster glimpsed at dusk atop ancient yews, watching with gold-flecked eyes. Then, on a rain-lashed eve, a stranger approached Avernus gate. The guards bristled until he raised his hand in peace. Fingers stained black-red as if dipped in paint. "I am Grimstroke," he announced, voice deep as old paper tearing. "I seek kinship among shadows." Behind him on the road, another figure crouched atop a fence post. Monkey King, staff across his shoulders, grin wide as dawn. "What's this? A house built on secrets," he cackled. I do love a good secret. Word reached Abaddon as he stood in contemplation by the source, a wound pulsing faintly with midnight hues. When he arrived at the gate, mist curling at his heels as if drawn by an unspoken summons, both strangers fell silent. Grimstroke bowed, not submission, but acknowledgment. I have walked beside living ink and deathless memory, he said softly. I know what it is to bear chains unseen. Monkey King only laughed. We're all prisoners here. His eyes sparkled with mischief and something keener. Some just have fancier cells. Abaddon regarded them both. The artist whose brush conjured demons from regret. The king whose tales bent reality itself, and for a moment felt kinship with neither or both. Why come here? He asked. Grimstroke met his gaze, a painter's melancholy in every line of his face. Because power, such as yours, does not go unnoticed forever. I would learn what bargains you have made, and whether they can be unmade. Monkey King spun atop his staff. And I'd see if your shadows have anything worth stealing, or if they'll swallow even me. The mist thickened around Abaddon's feet, restless, half resentful. But he held up a hand. Then enter, he said at last. But understand, here, legend is not armor, but weight. And all who seek secrets pay their due. The seventh night council. That night, beneath banners limp as shrouds in the windless dark, Abaddon sat with his guests in candle-lit gloom, the ancient council chamber cold as crypt stone. Grimstroke spoke first, his words coiled like ink across parchment. In my land, he intoned, the soul is bound by art and sorrow, a curse as much as gift, but your tethers are deeper still. Do you command your mist, or does it command you? Abaddon did not answer immediately. The flame caught in his eyes, a flicker not wholly human. I am its vessel, he said at last. But some vessels shape what is poured into them, or so I hope. Monkey King looked unimpressed. Oh, everyone's cursed or chosen these days. At least you got a cool sword out of it. He eyed Abaddon's blade, the first of three, its edge flickering like storm-lit midnight. Tell me, does your weapon cut only flesh, or can it divide lie from truth? Abaddon lifted the blade, felt its familiar weight. It shimmered, faintly, veins of dark energy pulsing along runes old as sin. When it must, it severs more than sinew. Monkey King gave an exaggerated shudder. Remind me not to ask for a haircut. Grimstroke studied both host and weapon. You are not unlike those painted in old nightmares. Champions chosen by forces beyond reason, tasked with holding thresholds between worlds. Abaddon inclined his head, not quite agreement, not quite denial. The mist pressed close then. A third presence at council, and all fell silent as it whispered between their minds, not words, but symbols, a door half open, a crown wreathed in shadow, a blade broken, then reforged. Grimstroke paled. Monkey King frowned. Abaddon understood, or thought he did, that some questions had no answer but endurance itself. Eighth among mortals, in days that followed, outsiders watched with keen interest. As Averest settled into its uneasy truce with legend, Grimstroke painted sigils along boundary stones, his brush leaving lines that glowed briefly, then faded into earth. He muttered incantations, half prayer, half warning, testing whether mist or ink would yield first. Monkey King wandered freely, stealing apples from kitchen stores, mimicking Abaddon's stride atop parapets. telling riddles to scullery maids until they shrieked, half in delight, half in fear, for none could be certain which mask he wore, trickster or omen. Meanwhile, Abaddon walked among his people. Some met his gaze with awe, others with terror. All deferred when he passed. He healed where he could, commanded when needed, grieved in silence for what legend had stolen from him. The easy laughter of youth, the simple bonds unclouded by power. He visited Cassira late one eve as she tended candles before the ancestral altar. She looked up, not startled, to find him there. "You carry more than our name now," she said gently. "Yes," he replied, "and I fear I may never set it down." She placed her hand over his, steady as stone. No one asks you to bear it alone, but both knew in their bones that some burdens are singular, by right or by doom. Ninth old ghosts stir. Word of Avernus's transformation reached farther than even its own legends anticipated. In distant sanctums, orders devoted to lost gods debated whether this was prophecy fulfilled or disaster impending. A hooded priestess at the shrine of nights wept black tears upon hearing Abaddon's tale. Thus comes the harbinger. The cycles end and begin anew. In the ruined libraries of Slum, a scribe pieced together fragments. Abandon all hope, pit without bottom, king crowned in shade, and wondered what might come if one such as Abaddon turned his gaze outward from his haunted hills. Even among enemies, there was grudging respect now. The captains, who had once sworn vengeance against Avernus, spoke instead of alliances. Cautious treaties brokered under watchful eyes, for none wished to tempt fate, where so many had vanished without trace. 10th parallels carved on stone. The masons of Avernus carved new friezes above the keep's main hall. Abaddon, standing amid swirling mist, sword held downward like an anchor binding darkness to earth. Figures kneeling at his feet, not in worship, but in resignation, the living and dead alike acknowledging a power neither wholly curse nor blessing, neither tyrant nor savior, but something older still, the weight that balances all accounts when night falls thickest on moor and mind alike. Children traced these images with shy fingers and asked their elders for meaning. The answers were careful, never quite complete. He is guardian, he is judge, he is reminder that some powers cannot be caged, only carried. 11th, the price of legend. Nightly, Abaddon dreamed strange dreams of walking endless moors beneath black suns, of voices calling from mist, none familiar, yet all aching with need, of 3 swords thrust into earth, one shining with fresh forged promise, one dulled by loss, one forever lost beyond reach. He woke always before dawn, uncertain whether these dreams were prophecy or simply warnings from whatever deep will animated mist itself. He found Grimstroke one morning under gray skies, the painter half mad from lack of sleep, his brush drawing sigils that vanished into dew. "You search for understanding," Abaddon observed. Grimstroke nodded bleakly. "And if there is none, then perhaps suffering is its own wisdom." The painter smiled thinly. "Or perhaps we are simply paint upon someone else's canvas." Monkey King appeared atop a nearby wall, legs dangling over emptiness. "If you two are done moping," he called cheerfully, There are apples ripe for stealing. Abaddon almost smiled and wondered how much lighter legend might be if carried by such unburdened souls. 12th, enduring twilight. So passed the days at House Averest, a twilight period, neither war nor peace, when legend thickened about its lord like another layer of armor or shroud. No one challenged him. None dared question what price he might yet pay for power so absolute it blurred man and myth together into one unyielding silhouette against an endless sky. But beneath every celebration, every whispered tale or careful pact with outsiders, ran a current of dread. For all things born must die, all power ebbs away, save perhaps that which endures through story alone. And in Averest, where stories grew wild and unpruned as bramble on moorland stone, the legend of Abaddon was at once shield, warning, and prophecy yet unwritten. A burden not even death could wholly lift from those who dared to walk amid the veils of Averest. Thus ends Part 8, The Shadow Crowned. Here stands Abaddon, judge and vessel, legend incarnate, unloved yet unchallenged, endured more than embraced by those sworn to his cause, consorting now with strangers, fated to test what little mastery any mortal may wield over power older than names themselves. And somewhere beyond these twilight lands, fate stirs, watching, waiting, for what stories such shadows might yet cast when next the black mist rises. Part 9. The Black Mist Remains. 1. The Gathering Shadows. Dawn in Averest was a thing of subtlety, if it could be called dawn at all. The horizon bled only the faintest promise of light, diluted and broken upon the twisted yews and brambled ridges. Upon the keep, banners drifted listlessly in a wind heavy with secrets, and the stones themselves seemed to slumber, humming beneath the weight of legend. Abaddon stood on the parapet, both sentinel and exile. The black mist clung to his form, not an aura, not armor, but a second skin, as familiar now as breath. Below, the source pulsed in its ancient wound, casting shivers of darkness over the moor. It had been weeks since Grimstroke and Monkey King arrived, one drawn by visions, the other by boredom or fate. They were outsiders here, yet the world outside Averest was changing. Rumors reached even these shadowed halls. Sorcerers seeking forbidden fonts, warlords hungering for forgotten power, whispers of a blade lost and a doom unclaimed. It seemed the eyes of the world had turned again to Averest and to him. He watched as Grimstroke approached along the wall walk, brush and scrolls in hand, robes flecked with dried ink and dew. Monkey King bounded behind him with feline caprice, balancing an apple on his staff, whistling a tune fit for lighter places. "Another gloomy morning," Monkey King announced, squinting at the sky. "Does it ever clear?" "In Averest," Grimstroke replied dryly. "The mist is both weather and history." Abaddon's gaze remained fixed on the moor. "And perhaps prophecy." Monkey King grinned, dropping the apple into his mouth. "Prophecy's overrated. So is gloom. You know, if you gave your people a holiday—" "Enough," said Grimstroke, though not unkindly. "We are here by choice, Sun Wukong. What brings us may also bind us." "Curiosity," Monkey King replied. "And stories worth stealing." A silence settled. Somewhere below, the source throbbed. A heartbeat, buried deep. 2nd, relics and rumors. Within the keep's vast library, dust motes whirled like miniature stars through shafts of gray light. Tomes lay stacked in uneven towers, their bindings cracked from generations of handling by hands both reverent and fearful. Abaddon traced his fingers across a half-remembered glyph, a circle broken thrice, inked in ancestral blood. Grimstroke hovered nearby, his brush twitching with restless energy. They come searching for what cannot be bought or taken. Grimstroke murmured, glancing at ancient maps detailing every known fissure and secret passage leading to the source. Even now I hear their dreams, mages speaking the tongue of clouds, priests chanting in distant towers, Monkey King sprawled across a table, tail flicking irritably. If you're so scared of thieves, why let them get so close? Abaddon closed his eyes. The mist is not mine to give or deny. Those who seek it must meet its terms, whatever they may be. But there are always terms, Grimstroke said softly. Even legends pay tithe. A hush followed, the hush of doors opening somewhere deep in the keep, boots echoing on cold stone, voices raised in unfamiliar accents. "Visitors," Monkey King said brightly. "Shall I fetch my best impersonation of a butler?" Abaddon shook his head. "Let them knock. In Avernus, even hope is let in by invitation only. Third visitors at twilight." The first delegation arrived at dusk, envoys from lands both near and far. Sorcerers cowled in blue fire, knights draped in banners older than Avernus itself, prophets trailing incense and riddles. They were led into the great hall where shadows clung thickly to every arch and pillar. Abaddon received them beneath the sigil of his house, a circle broken against a field of black. "You stand before the guardian of the source," intoned an old chronicler at his side. "Speak your purpose." The leader, a magus with silver eyes, bowed low. "We seek knowledge of the mist and mastery over its gifts." Abaddon's voice was quiet, but immutable as bedrock. "The black mist yields to none but itself." An uneasy laughter circled among the delegates. A priest stepped forward, trembling as she spoke. "If not mastery, guidance, or warning, our world trembles on the edge of change." Grimstroke's brush danced nervously on his scroll. Monkey King yawned with feigned disinterest. Abaddon studied them all, seeing not faces, but echoes, not intentions, but consequences rippling outward from this room across the world. "I am no oracle," he said at last. "I guard what must be guarded. I bear what must be borne." The magus pressed on, but the legend speaks of 3 swords, one lost beyond reach. Abaddon's hand twitched on his own ancient blade. Monkey King's eyes gleamed with sudden mirth or mischief. "Now that," he murmured quietly enough for only Grimstroke to hear, "is a story worth stealing. The blade between worlds." That night, long after envoys had departed and only whispers clung to the corridors, Abaddon sat alone in his chamber, staring out toward the source. He remembered dreams, 3 swords thrust into earth, one shining bright with hope, yet untarnished, one dulled by sorrow, one hidden where neither light nor shadow could claim it. The lost blade haunted him, its absence a wound not unlike that which scarred the land itself. There were memories only half remembered, a duel fought on a field drowned in fog, a hand reaching into darkness and returning empty, a vow never spoken aloud. Footsteps sounded behind him. Grimstroke entered quietly, holding his scroll to his chest as if it might shield him from what was to come. "You ponder old wounds," Grimstroke observed. "We are all shaped by loss," Abaddon replied. Monkey King slipped in through an open window with feline grace, perching atop a wardrobe. "The world loves a quest," Monkey King said cheerfully, "especially for lost things." Abaddon's gaze never left the night-strewn moor. "Some things are lost because they must be, but some things return," Grimstroke countered softly, "when called by need or by story." Silence stretched between them, all that was unsaid hanging heavier than any spoken word. The price of power. In the days that followed, more envoys arrived, some bearing gifts or threats or riddles meant to unravel what could not be unraveled. A masked assassin from Noxus sought secrets of immortality. A pair of sisters from a shattered priesthood brought tokens once hallowed by moonlight. Even a warlord from Stonehall offered parley, in exchange for just one taste of what lay beneath Avernus's soil. Abaddon heard each petition with the patience of stone, and rejected all with equal calm. "The mist is not currency," he told them, "nor weapon nor salve for wounds you will not name." Some left cursing, others lingered in hope of catching truth in an unguarded glance or whispered aside. Yet, through it all, the tides of persuasion and threat, something else gathered at the edge of knowing, a presence older than even Avernus's stones or shadows. One night, as moonlight bled thinly through clouds and black mist pooled thickly over earth, Grimstroke woke gasping from dream visions thick with ink and shadow. He saw a blade suspended between world and void, its hilt wrapped in memory, its edge singing with longing. He saw Abaddon standing before it, not as lord, but as supplicant. And behind him, the assembled dead, each bearing wounds shaped like questions. When he told Abaddon this vision, the guardian only nodded, as if confirming something long awaited. "Perhaps it is time," Abaddon said softly, "for old debts to find their reckoning." Sixth, the quest unfolds. Preparations began quietly. Word spread only among those bound most closely to Abaddon's cause, or fate. On a morning choked silver-gray with mist, Abaddon summoned Grimstroke and Monkey King before the threshold of the source itself. The earth here was black glass veined with opalescence. Nothing moved except shadow and wind. "I go to seek what was lost," Abaddon declared. "I ask no one to follow, but know that none who enter are unchanged." Monkey King hopped down lightly, twirling his staff. "A quest? That's more like it." He grinned wide enough to split gloom itself. "And besides, who'd trust you two brooding over such secrets alone?" Grimstroke bowed solemnly. "My brush has always thirsted for truth, however dark its ink." The trio descended into swirling vapor, each step drawing them deeper through layers of memory and meaning, past crypts where ancestral lords slept uneasy, past veins of stone humming with power stolen from prehistory. As they moved, shapes gathered at their periphery, phantoms born of legend and longing, ghosts of fallen heroes, half-formed wraiths begging for release, faces both beloved and accursed, blurring past like leaves borne away by autumn winds. At last, they stood before a gate fashioned not by mortal hands, but by will alone, a threshold where black mist thickened until it became almost solid, where time itself slowed, and only intent could serve as compass. Abaddon reached into darkness, and darkness reached back. Seventh, through the mist. Crossing that boundary was unlike any passage through mere place. Each step weighed memory against desire. Each breath tasted of every dream left unfulfilled by those who'd ever sought power here. Monkey King's shape shifted from form to form, sometimes child, sometimes warrior, sometimes trickster so wild even shadow could not catch him. Grimstroke painted sigils in air, each line binding fragmentary fears within patterns ancient as myth. Abaddon felt the mist flow through him, not resisting, not surrendering, but judging, deciding anew what burden he would bear and what price would be asked in return. They found themselves at last in a chamber so vast it seemed borderless, its roof lost amid drifting clouds of luminous vapor. At its heart stood 3 swords half buried in mirrored stone. One shone bright, its steel untouched by sorrow. One was tarnished, edge dulled by lifetimes of regret. The third was only silhouette, as if cast from absence itself, the lost blade, waiting neither for hand nor for name, but for purpose renewed. All fell silent, save for pulse of blood and mist alike. 8. The trial. Without command or signal, Grimstroke stepped forward first. He painted a sigil mid-air, a door within a door, opening onto scenes glimpsed but never lived, a house consumed by ink, a son cast out by pride, an artist forever remaking loss into legend. The mist judged and passed over him like a breathless sigh. He staggered back, eyes wet with truths he would never paint again. Monkey King approached next. He laughed, brash at first, then softer, as images rippled across his face. Crowns won and lost, friends betrayed, then saved, an endless chase for freedom within cages spun by his own hand. The mist shimmered around him, not quite accepting, not quite denying. He winked at Abaddon. Maybe I'll come back for another round. Abaddon faced the final sword. He knelt, and for an instant was not lord, nor legend, nor even man, but only witness to all that had come before. He did not reach for the blade. He simply waited, allowing the mist to measure him against every burden carried since birth, every curse defied or embraced. Long moments passed. Then the lost sword flickered, resolve taking shape where void had ruled. It lifted not into Abaddon's grasp, but beside him, rooted still in mirrored stone, reflecting now not absence, but potential, a path unwalked, a story unclaimed. And Abaddon understood. Some powers were never meant to be wielded alone. Some burdens could only be shared between living and dead, between legend and those who carried it onward. 9th return. They returned through mist, less burdened than before, though each bore new scars invisible to any eye but their own. Above ground, the keep awaited, banners shifting subtly, stones humming softer than yesterday, the source beating on unchanged, and yet changed forever. Envoys came again, seeking answers they would never wholly receive. To each, Abaddon spoke plainly, the mist abides. It cannot be owned nor banished, only carried forward by those willing to become part of its story. Rumors spread anew. That house of Averest still stood unconquered, that 3 swords awaited 3 fates, that Abaddon had passed into myth more surely than death or time could claim him, and yet he lingered still as judge, as guardian, as reminder that some legends are both promise and warning, that every quest begun echoes onward, that every wound may yet become gift, that every shadow thrown by legend leaves light enough for new stories to start again. 10th Epilogue. Veil unbroken. In years to come, when even memory failed and names faded from stone, children traced sigils on cold walls and asked their elders about Keeper of Mist, about source beneath black moors, about heroes both burdened and free. Answers were careful, never quite complete. He is guardian. He is judge. He is reminder that what cannot be caged might yet shape us whole if we dare endure its dawn. And out beyond these words, beyond keep or moor or even mist itself, the third sword remained, reflecting hopes unborn, waiting patient as dust for hands yet unshaped, for hearts brave enough to reclaim what darkness offers when twilight endures. For so long as there is story, the black mist remains. Thus ends the Veil of Avernus,